All right, welcome back to Nugget Garage. This week, it's a pandemic again. Well, not again, but we're locked down again, which means we're surrounded by toilet paper hoarders and panic buyers and depression. And anyway, I'm here by myself today. Chris is off doing some family stuff, and this week has now really gone to chaos. You know, customer cars and just the general chaos of being in a lockdown means that we're probably not going to really do anything that productive. So I figure I've actually been working on this in the background, and we'll just talk a little bit about what we've been doing off camera. Grandpa Cressida, I've been dallying that. It's as awesome as I thought it would be. Not too bad on fuel. We took it out to roll racing 2 weeks ago. It actually went pretty good. It actually wouldn't start when I got there for some reason, and we're hitting starter motors and whatnot, trying to make it work. Actually, heaps of people gave me a hand with that, which was good, thank you. So basically, after it miraculously started, we just left it running for the next 4 hours. It wasn't the fastest car there by any means, but it wasn't slow either, which was pretty cool. Ended up finding out a couple of days ago that the battery terminal to the side of the block, the earth, was loose. So I must have only done it up finger tight. Other than that, it drives exactly how I wanted it to drive. It's smooth, quiet. The only real nag I have about it is my inlet manifold design. It's somehow ended up with like a intake manifold resonance at about 2100 revs, which is right where you sit at about 110. So I may have to make some kind of intake resonator, try and eliminate that, or weld some plates somewhere to stiffen it up. This thing in the background, I thought it would be a good idea well, I didn't know anything about the car, so I didn't know anything about the wiring, so I've pulled it down to its undies a little bit more than what you've last seen, just so I've got an idea now of where everything is. And I've gone and started doing the Nexus install, which I'm not normally scared of wires, but there was a lot of wires, and you've pretty much got to rethink how you wire everything, because the ECU has to power every device and get feedback from it. So this is probably the first time I've actually had to write myself and draw myself a diagram. I used Haltech's sheet for that because there's no way in hell I was remembering where everything was going. The original harness in the engine bay, I ended up separating the two segments. It had an injector and crank angle sensor wiring harness, which was probably the problem that I was having. The lower half was all of the sensors, oil pressures and oil temperatures and water temperatures and trans temperatures and trans pressures. I back probed all that harness, checked all the connectors, everything on it was pretty good. Had decent TEF cell wire and stuff. So I've actually put a junction in here and joined in and reused all the bottom part of the harness, and the top half I've remade. The inlet manifold's obviously got 12 injectors. What I ended up doing here was pulling all of his wire out of these wiring covers and then reallocating it all and repinning a few of these connectors. And he had like a high bulky style connector on the lower rail, which was fouling on the bracket for the top rail, so I've changed all them over. Reused all that same TEF cell wire. I think that's why he got confused. He actually had a couple of wires around the wrong way because they're all the same colour. Obviously brought a power in for the 3 different rails, and then all your ground sides from the ECU. That's going to marry up with this side from the Nexus. So with the Nexus, you actually use one of the 25 amp channels to power your injection and ignition. I've used 2 more to do trans fan and fuel pump. So I've got to finish wiring this. Okay, so I'm redoing the crank angle sensor circuit as well, and I've put one wideband knock sensor on it. So I ended up putting the Nexus under where the passenger seat will go. The battery was here, but I've done some measurements and some trial setting in this thing. Since I'm such a lump, I'm going to have to move the taxi bar back about 5 inches, and I'm going to have to weld in the side intrusion and kick it out a little bit to fit around my fat ass. So what that's meant is this seat here is going to have to sit back further, so it won't have room for the battery. So the battery's now going to be in the boot. I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to get a LiPo battery from EV Works, like I did with my KE10. They're a good battery. So the fuel pump and the thermo fans now run straight off a 25 amp output from the Nexus PDM, so there's no fuses and no relays. So I ended up using that tape that you all love, not to insulate this time, but to balloon it and be noise, anti-noise, vibration-y, whatever they say. So it runs up under through the dash. Where are we going here? Maybe we have some light, there we go. So this thing has like crane fireball ignition coils and a M&W Pro Drag 4. So I've cut up his harness, shortened it, repinned it, re-douche connected it, and that's basically where I'm up to now. I'm going to join the ignition outputs to the ignition coils and CDI, using once again the Nexus supplies a 25 amp circuit from its 25 amp outputs, these ones. So I want this thing to drive and form like a sort of like a standard car. So I've gone through and refurbished all of the original KE10 barrels that was actually not working. The light switch, the contacts were dirty, it wouldn't work. Same with the wiper control. This thing still actually has a wiper motor in it, which I've got working as 1 speed and running off the Nexus. So every one of these original switches here I've soldered wires onto and sent them out to a douche plug. Same as the ignition, same as the the indicator stalk and high beam stalk. So everything that runs here is powered by a 12 volt output, one of the 8 amp outputs from the Nexus, and then they all send signals back to the ECU. So left indicator, right indicator, low beam, light, or Parker's lights, high beam, all get set to the Nexus, and then it sends its own 8 amp output back to run all that, which is, I don't know, geeky I guess, and wasteful. It feels like it's being wasteful because you're wasting these 8 amp channels for stupid shit like a brake light, but there's enough of them, so why not? I guess if you're in an application where you needed to use lots and lots of outputs, you could probably go back to making the switches actually do the work like they did. Their car had it's got a Vipet EGT amplifier. There you can probably see. So it's not CAN or anything, it's actually using 4 analog inputs. So I've sent that back to the ECU as well. I actually have a whole 1 connector full of inputs and outputs still that I haven't used. So, and I'd say this car is fairly complex in its wiring. So the Nexus definitely has enough I/O. You definitely have to try pretty hard to run it out. What else? The dash is just going to go back in. It's going to be dead, just for display. The steering wheel, I'm not going to use that little one. I've got an original KE10 steering wheel. I've started wiring the IC7 dash. These are the left, right, park and high beam wires. I haven't actually checked that they still need to be physically wired with the Nexus, or whether that sends those light signals as a CAN thing, but I did a quick read in the actual manual and it looks like you still got to physically wire them. So that's got to get wired into this. So yeah, I might actually even just repin the CAN 1 input, put the actual opposite side of this connector on there and plug it straight to the dash, so I've got one less connection. Yeah, the taxi bar is going to have to move. I ended up putting a seat in here, a polyprop seat, and cut the seat backing brace off and put it right up against that bar, and while I can fit in and drive it, it's not comfortable, and I don't want to spend a bit of time in this car, so move that. Needs new harnesses anyway. The polyprop seat will sit right down in this recess, which means I have enough room for my giant head. I'm also going to have to move. We're not going to use a single Mac valve with manifold pressure to control the gate. We're going to use 2, like add and reduce, and we're going to use CO2, so that probably will be over this side somewhere. We use that to control 2 of the gates. We've already run the wire out here somewhere, that one. So that's going to be add, reduce and power. So we're getting there. I reckon over the Easter weekend, providing even more lockdown crap doesn't happen, we should be at a stage where I can hopefully at least power this thing up. I reckon there's going to be a fair bit of configuring in the actual Nexus, aside of actually running the engine, because you've got to set up every 20 inputs and 20 outputs just for the actual car wiring itself. I also made the mistake of not buying the crimper for these jiggers. So that's coming from Heltec probably today. It's like a 3-jaw or something, and it just crushes it onto the 1-gauge cable. I might have to put a couple of positive and negative terminal posts here, and just, you know, I want to run the earth lead from the battery to the kill switch in the boot all the way through, you know, to the side of the block. So I've got a good earth. And then the same with the power, it has to go to here, to the Nexus, and then also to the starter motor. So I assume that's how you do it to a post. That way when we chuck the negative isolator off it, that should be sufficient to drop the whole circuit out. I also had to make little, it's just RHS boxes that hang off this seat rail, just for the Nexus to sit on. The other problem I had too is the reverse micro switch in here is faulty, so at some stage I'll have to pull that apart and fix that. It's all wired to use it just doesn't work. So the only other thing that I have to add now is a transmission temperature sensor. I've made provisions down there and a plug for the wiring, so it's actually wired to underneath the car. It's just not completed. There's no sensor in the pan. And we're going to use an NTK sensor, which was used by that old alcohol methanol meter that was in there, so the Nexus can run that you know, straight to its own controller. And they even make a cable that goes from this to their Deutsch connector. It's only like 22 bucks or something, so it's better than me making it. That's coming today as well. And then apparently the latest firmware for the Nexus will let me run the NTK how I want with closed loop, and we'll see what happens. Apparently I've got to ask for that. It was a pretty good idea actually to pull the car apart, because now I know where everything is, whereas prior to that I didn't have a bloody clue. The other issue I found too, this had a KE11 or a late model 10 bumper on it, which was covering up the parker and indicator holes in the front apron. Now I want this to be a road car again, so I've found a guy who's sending me some, which means I may have to change back to the early KE10 bumper, which I have at home. They're all wide once again, just I can't test it because I don't have the lights. A few of these bulbs are missing as well. This one, I think 2 in the rear, so I've got to find some bulbs for them. The brake switch also seems to get hung up every now and then, so I'll have to go under the dash and figure out why that is. So definitely worth keeping some kind of diagram indicating what you've done with inputs and outputs, because there are so many of them. The other thing with this car too is it's got a lot of boxes and stuff in there that I don't really have any info on, so I've had to try and find wiring diagrams for old versions of Vipec EGT amplifiers and M&W Pro Drag 4. I'm just trying to figure out what version it is so I can figure out the pin out. But it looks like it's got it's the one that's got the dual output control, so it's got a high and low, so I think that narrows it down to one particular box. Yeah, power level P. We'll have to check, but I'm assuming they had it wired A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Assumption. What could possibly go wrong? So what do I need? That's power. Ground. I might reuse that. Go through there. I might reuse the shell that was on there. It's a good thing about these Deutsch plugs, you can reuse all of the shells. Save some money because they add up quite fast. They get expensive pretty quick. I can't believe people actually use those little block offs. What are you scared? Dust, whatever. So these 4 wires here are the inputs. Call A, B, C, D. And then the red wire with the orange trace is the power level which from memory, I can't remember if you go grounded or give it power. Ground. Which is cool. Luckily I ran a spare drive-by-wire output up to here, so I'll use that to switch the power level on the CDI. As a fluke, but anyway. This is why my back is stuffed. I've been doing this for 2 weeks, and then on customer cars as well. Yeah, right, I probably should be using the next size down, but them's the brakes. Now I've got to figure out which output to what colour, because my OCD won't let me just put them in a random order. So trigger A is pin 15, which is 3 across. Straight blue. Trigger B is pin 14. Blue, brown. Trigger C, pin 3. Ooh, what's it doing down there? Somebody forgot something. Blue, red. Which means D is blue, orange. Tape. Today is not going to be fun. So you seriously want to watch all this, or do I keep going, or what? So up under the dash, this is going to join into here, so we know, I don't know, layers. Should be right. The bird outside sounds like it's doing the intro to Enter Sandman. That's really weird. It is. Someone's been listening to too much Metallica. Anyway, I can hear people staring around at the front, which means they don't know how to read business hours. So I'm going to go and deal with that. That can be the end of this video, I guess. I have no clue whether any of this is in focus. Normally I have somebody behind the camera. Normally I have someone to talk shit to about whatever. Anyway, we'll get some work done this long weekend. We'll film that and have something more exciting than this dribble for you next week. Thanks for watching. video, but that's what you get. Good luck, Chris. What have you got going on over there? Shadows and... What the crap? Move that camera. I'll get the camera out. I'm a pro. All right, so over the weekend, Easter weekend, we'll actually do some work and film it and do something more exciting than this. Hopefully this thing might even make a noise. See you then.